Good evening. Welcome to our virtual Finance Committee meeting Tuesday, May 18th, 2021 at 5:30. In accordance with an act to implement provisions necessary to the health, welfare, and safety of the citizens of Maine in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency, as enacted to read Section G11 MRSA, Section 403A, public proceedings through remote access during a declaration of a state of emergency to COVID-19 and for 30 days following the termination of that state of emergency. The Finance Committee meeting will be held through Google Meet. This meeting will be live streamed and available for viewing at www.msad11.org. Call to order, please.
Yes, Becky Fless,
Yay.
Nicole Medor,
Yay.
Jim Lothridge,
Yay.
Patrick Saucier,
Yay.
Colin McGuff.
Yay.
Great. All set, Becky.
Perfect. Thank you. First item on the agenda, discussion. And Andrea Dish is here also, our business manager. Discussion of the Hope Field fundraising.
Sure. So as you know, the Hoke Field Committee has been meeting regularly in anticipation of the carpet being laid down in June, hopefully. And as a part of that conversation we've been having has centered also around the fundraising. So we have fundraised enough money to actually pay for the carpet, all right? So all of that is now paid for. There's some additional fundraising that is going on to help fund the concession stand, fund the storage, and the recognition wall. But beyond that, we began discussing whether fundraising should be ongoing. And it was discussed to kind of bring that here to you for your consideration. And so there were a couple things specifically that the committee discussed. One, it discussed the possibility of continuing fundraising to either pay back the district the $250,000 that was contributed, whether to continue to raise money to put in a reserve account to help pay for future replacement of the carpet, or do we continue to raise money to pay for the track around the field that needs to be resurfaced? And that absolutely is going to be needed to be done. And the cost for that is approximately $250,000. There was discussion about the possibility of cutting out one or two pieces, maybe Chad can speak more to this, of cutting the turf out in one or two places, and that we could, on an annual basis, we could use that to advertise local businesses. And so that was one way that we could do some ongoing fundraising. And that's what sparked this entire conversation. I think when we originally came to the board, we were fundraising, or when Chad and Nate came to the board, they were fundraising just for the turf field. But now now that we're close, we're looking more long-term and just need some guidance from this committee on how you would like to proceed. And Chad, do you want to talk a little bit about your idea of the future fundraising?
As far as the field is concerned?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the options that the turf creates is that they can cut out a section and then put in basically a patch that has the logo of a business or a sponsor. And you can do it for a period of time. You could do it for a season. You could do it for a year. You could do it for a couple of years and charge that organization or that company an annual fee or a fee for the period of time that they want their logo to be on the field, or in the field, I should say. And so we talked about that with the previous owner of the company that we're purchasing the turf from. And it's just an option to consider versus somebody that, the main sponsors that we have on there right now that are in there for the lifetime of the field. these would be for a shorter period of time and potentially generate some revenue.
So Becky, is there anything that you want to add?
Yes, I want, I think fundraising, ongoing fundraising is an idea that we should talk about. For the replacement in the future. However, I want the high school, so Chad and Nate do the yeoman's share of the fundraising. And I want for them to be able to respectfully to focus on the things that they need to focus on. And maybe we catch our breath for a moment and see where we are after the end of the school year. I think it's important that the community owns the field. I do think that, and it was never the intention for the district to own the field. But I just think there's also a focus that needs to happen for them because they're not professional fundraisers. And that's not necessarily what we want them to do.
But we also heard from Gabe that the track is long overdue in being resurfaced.
Yes.
It needs to be resurfaced. Some areas need extensive work. And so the longer we put it off, the more dangerous it becomes potentially for our students who use it.
No, you're right.
So we either are going to have to budget for that at $250,000 or continue potentially fundraising so that we can resurface that track so that it's usable.
And you're absolutely right about that. And I think as it is right now, I believe we heard that it's not even good to not because of anything that happened with the turf field, but it's not in suitable condition for us to really hold track meets. So we just need to, I just don't want it to be on Nate and Chad's shoulders. If we're going to raise money, I think it needs to be a broader effort because their plates are so full. And that's my concern, Chad. I'm not trying to take something away from you that you love. I just know that your plate is really full. So we have some hands up. Jim, you were first. Colin, you were, I think, second, and then Chad.
Okay. I honestly think we postponed maintenance on our football field for years, and it was not the proper thing to do.
Right.
We should have been maintaining that field on a regular basis as the responsibility of the district. That's if we're going to have a field, we should maintain a field. I also feel if we're going to have a track, we should maintain a track.
Yeah.
Safely so the students are safe. Any visitors that come to participate in the track meet at our school are safe. So I think we should be budgeting to do the repair on the track as part of a district project or budgeting process, because it isn't something we should be fundraising for. I just think we should be doing it, and that's the right thing to do, not just because I don't want to fundraise. I think we should be fundraising, but I'd like to retire the debt to the district because that was something we said we would do. But as far as the track itself, we need to get that fixed. If it's not safe, we shouldn't be using it. And we should make it available. I think we should get it fixed myself and do it properly. It's a little late in this budget year to be doing it, but whatever we can do, I think we should do, whether it's a remedial repairs to it to get us through this year. But if that's the case, we should budget it to get it replaced next year. That's my thinking. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Colin?
Yeah, a quick question. If we sort of thought about the field and all the accompanying structures and requirements as just an ongoing cost, does anybody have a good sense of what that annual amount would be? So if we were to think about, like, if we were to monetize sponsorship opportunities in conjunction with the field, what would the target goal on an annual basis be to keep it in condition and do improvements over time instead of like one big swack of fundraising? Don't answer, but that's the question. And the second one is there an existing inventory of placements for sponsorship that we could look at to think about, like, if we were to do an annual fundraising goal to support the field, what would that sponsorship pyramid look like? Because you typically want like your premier sponsor and a couple second tier and on down. And lastly, if there's an effort to try to move toward that, I'd be happy to pitch in because I've done this sort of thing before.
Thank you. The first question, is that an Andrea one? Would Andrea know the answer to that, you think? Off the top of her head?
About
Check.
how much in fundraising? No.
No. How much it would cost to, the first question of how much if we were to do ongoing.
Nope.
Okay.
I have no idea how much the sponsorships will raise. I mean, between the track and the field, we're going to be looking at $750,000, which is basically our facilities budget for about 4 years. So, yep, I think we're probably going to have to finance it. I don't see how we're going to be able to raise that kind of money without fundraising. I mean, it'll take us forever, and I don't think we have forever for those track replacements. So,
Okay. Chad?
Thank you, Becky. I would say that in regards to the current condition of the track, yes, it is overdue for resurfacing. I went and walked it the other day with Nate. The rubber that was put on it is really thin in a lot of places, but for me, with my background of, I coached track for a better part of 10 years. We ran on cinder tracks, which is basically dirt, as compared to a tar track, which were some, and now we've got the rubberized track. So I don't see it as being a danger to anybody. To answer your concern, Jim, I don't see it as being a hazard for anyone to be running on that track. The base of that track I think is in very good shape. It's probably about 6 inches thick at most points, 6 inches thick of tar. The rubberization and the lining of the track is where the big money comes into play. So I don't think there's really much structural that I could see when I walked it from my background. Again, I'm not an engineer and I'm not a construction person, but as a former coach and having seen many tracks, ours is not in that bad of a shape other than being really thin on the rubber. The question that Nate and I had is that our initial goal was to cover the $250,000 or the $50,000 a year for the next 5 years and try, whether we hit that mark or not is unknown as to what we do, but it was more about the effort of trying to offset some of that money that the district is going to be financing over the next 5 years. So that was one of the questions that we had. That generated a conversation about the track, and instead of trying to repay the $250,000 over the next 5 years, looking at ways to raise money to put towards the resurfacing of the track. We can do things, and one of the things that we talked about is hosting events like regional track meets, and you'll do like what they call invitationals, and teams will pay $200, $250 to come in and compete at an invitational. And it would be, where do we put that money? Typically, all revenues go into the general fund. And would that be the case that these would go back into the general fund, and then the district would just budget for whatever we're going to do to the track, or do those funds go into a separate account dedicated towards repairs and maintenance of a specific of the track and the field? So it's part of it will be a conversation about where the funds go, and if we want to do things like hosting the regional soccer finals and the gate receipts, we would make a percentage of those, and a percentage goes to the MPA. We could host regional playoffs in football, lacrosse, soccer, field hockey, and generate funds that way. So that's just some of the ideas that Nate and I have talked about with the committee, and just we all felt it was important to bring it to you folks. So.
Okay, thank you, Chad. Andrea?
So maybe instead of paying the track, maybe instead of paying the field off with carryover, we continue to make lease payments on the field. And instead, if there's $250,000, then we use the $250,000 that we would have used to pay off the football field and use it to replace or resurface the track. And then we use the fundraising money going forward to start to pay down or pay towards the replacement of the new turf field. So
Andrea, it's not likely that the resurfacing of the track could occur before this school year budget closes. Okay.
So instead, perhaps let me see whether or not we can switch the purpose of, maybe we can pay off one and apply for another loan for the 250,000. So we still continue, we've paid off one project and we're still carrying a $250,000 loan for the other. And then starting to bank those sponsorship funds for replacement of the new turf field moving forward. At some point, we need to figure out how to stagger these projects. We can't do both at the same time. We just cannot afford to do both at the same time. That's my opinion. So we need to figure out a way to start banking money, and I don't know, perhaps Gabe said that if we continued to resurface or spray the track with this UV stuff, the length of the track would last longer than it's currently lasted, and maybe we'd be able to stagger them that way. So maybe that's an idea.
And to get 16 years out of that track is pretty significant. I would say a 10-year lifespan of a rubberized surface is stretching it, and this one was surfaced 16 years ago.
I thought Gabe had said that if we put the UV on it, that we could possibly get 20 years out of it, but maybe I misunderstood. So
that may be the case. I didn't talk with the vendor that does the resurfacing, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. But we're just looking for a couple answers as to, I think, Andrea, what you're talking about is keeping the lease purchase for the turf field and spreading it out over the 5 years, like one of the plans was that we talked about, instead of paying it off immediately and then using the money that we would have used to resurface the track.
I'm not sure with what Pat said. I don't think I can keep the existing loan for the turf field for the track, or because basically of what they took out for equity in the field. So I need to shift that somehow to the track, or I need to talk with Andrew Scoggin. I have no doubt that we're able to get a a $250,000 loan or repurpose the purpose of this loan. We just need to work it out with Greg, but instead of paying it off like we were going to do, try to tackle the other project and keep one lease purchase payment in the budget.
If I could just say one last thing.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you stay the course and pay off the turf as is regularly scheduled, and the fundraising efforts go towards a year out of resurfacing the track next year, partly through next year's budget and partly through fundraising efforts that we put towards that project, would that be a more wise approach? And then we know what we're up against as far as trying to get to that goal.
I would, in my opinion, I would really like to start banking revenue from those sponsorships for the replacement of the turf field. If we're looking at close to $500,000, and what are we looking at? How many years? 10, 12, 14?
Mhm.
I think that would be my preference, but it's not my decision to make.
Becky, Jim has had his hand raised.
Oh, Jim, yes.
Yeah, I like what Andrea said. I have one question, then a comment. If we were to decide to do this, could it be done for next track season? And that's either going to be Chad or Nate to answer that question.
It's probably a Gabe question.
Okay.
Gabe is the person who has been in contact with the company, so we would have to ask him.
Okay. If it could be done and we decide to do it, I just assume get it done. Andrew's 100% correct. We should be budgeting for this on an annual basis. We should be setting aside 25, 35, I don't know how many thousands of dollars a year, but we should be prepared to replace the football field, and we should be prepared to resurface the track field on an ongoing annual basis. Not that we would fix those or repair those every year, but we should have a war chest set aside that would take care of all of these problems. And the idea of having to, we just finished the track, the football field. Now we're going to deal with the track field. We should have been figuring on this 5, 6, 7 years ago. So that's my thinking. We just need to plan ahead and spend our money wisely.
Well, Jim, I think it takes us back to the conversation we were having prior to the pandemic,
Yeah.
where we talked about the need for a bond, that we have some expensive projects that we just can't afford to build into our regular budget. Now, while we've maintained our buildings fairly well, we have not paved our parking lots. We know that they're in serious need of repaving, and that was just one project alone across the district. I think that we were looking at somewhere around $1 million, right? Something like that, to repave all of the schools. And I believe at that time, Jim, I believe the track was on that list that would be folded into a bond project.
I was thinking about that. I was going to ask Andrea, and I forgot about it, frankly. If we were anywhere in the cycle for bond issues going to the state, where are we set with that? I know there was a time frame that we had to work within, and I don't know where that came to. So if Andrea could let us know, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Andrea?
So they do fall borrowing or in spring borrowing. So I know that there is a timeline that we need to follow in order to make the fall borrowing with the main bond bank. And I don't know what that schedule is right now. I haven't looked. So I didn't know that the board was still interested in considering a bond. But
We haven't discussed it, so.
There were
We
so many other things on the list to do in this last year and a half.
Yeah.
So it's a miracle we even remembered the
Mhm.
term bond.
Yeah.
Right. No, I've been thinking about it probably the last month, wondering about because the needs are still there, and with all the pandemic issues that we've had and all the federal monies we've needed to spend on a shortish timeline, it hasn't seemed like the right time to bring it up. But the only there's nothing really missing from what we were going to bond. All those things are still there, and all still need to be done.
Yep.
And we're getting the turf field done faster than we thought we were going to.
My concern with doing a bond and doing all the paving at once is when it's needed to be done again, all the paving is going to need to be done at once, and we're going to need to take out another bond. I don't know if it would be best to try to stagger these projects in like we do with our roofs and do a school rather than constantly. I mean, we would be looking at a bond every 10 years, because our paving wouldn't last more than 10 years. So,
Well, most of our paving has lasted now for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, right? So,
The paving at all the new elementary schools is original.
right,
The new elementary schools aren't new elementary schools anymore. So,
right.
yeah.
it takes a lot of money to take care of 6 schools, and we try to put our money on the things that are needed most, roofs and of course safety things. And when we do budgeting, a lot of things get cut along the way rather than cutting instructional teachers or things in the classroom. So things go by the wayside because of our priority. So
So I'm not certain, Becky,
I'm
if
not
I have any clarity around this topic and how we are to proceed.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure either. I would need to know from Gabe where we really are, if there's something that we can spray on it that would make it last for 5 or 6 more years. Um, I don't think that's what he meant.
No.
So I don't think we've got that. I don't know if we want to entertain Cullen's idea around fundraising, if he's got some expertise that he would speak to, without putting you on the spot, Cullen. I don't. If so, we can do it at another time.
Well, that's something that should run in parallel. If there's an opportunity to monetize the space that helps offset the annual cost, we should do that anyway. But that doesn't fix the actual budgeting issue, which is there's ongoing expense that ought to be built in.
Gotcha. Okay. Now we're clear on that. So I guess it's really it's what do we want to do? Finance committee. This is our work. Do we want to put it off until after we have the discussion about the second thing that's on our agenda? And do we want to potentially put it off until after the budget referendum in June, and put it in, fold it into next year? Or
Just speaking for myself, I'm really curious to hear what the town managers have to say at the next meeting, before we start talking about adding another bond out there.
yeah, I'm curious what happens if they don't get 5% revenue sharing instead of 3.5%. That's a curiosity. And what they'd say if they do, I just don't know.
Well, this is not urgent, this conversation, and a decision does not have to be made today. We can certainly put this on hold, but a decision will need to be made in the near future. And as Chad and Nate are generating ideas to raise additional dollars, we just need some direction from the finance committee and from the board as to whether you want Nate and Chad to continue with that, or whether you want to stop the fundraising for the Hoke Field and find another method in which to fund some of these needs.
Saucier at his hand up.
You all set for me to go? Okay. If Chad and Nate are all set with continuing the fundraising, I don't see why that's an issue. I do have some reservations about bonds. I like the idea of paying the $250,000 off and put us in a position that later on, if something does happen, something that is urgent, we don't have a bond or a loan over our heads. So if something happens to one of the schools, it needs a major repair, then we are in a position financially that we can get that loan, get that bond if the timing is correct and stuff like that to do such. I just don't know if, I guess it's up to Chad and Nate, in my opinion, if they want to continue with the fundraising. I think that's the best way to go, is to go that route. But that's just my 2 cents on this whole thing.
Thank you, Patrick. Others?
If by fundraising, I just assume that you mean the field sponsorships. We're not talking about dinner in the den and things like that, correct? And the other part of my comment is, until we decide what to do with those, I think we should put the monies, or it would be my recommendation to put the monies from the sponsorships and those things generated by the turf field in a separate account, rather than folding them in to the general account until such time the finance or the board makes a decision. So if we could at least come to that, or some sort of decision regarding that, that would be great. So it doesn't get folded in with your regular rental fees or sponsorships or whatnot into the general fund. If you want to do that at a later time, we can certainly do that, but.
And I agree with you completely. Chad, I'm not sure if you can see, Chad put something in the chat that said we can also look at grants for the track. Keep in mind that we're not necessarily looking at the same individuals, the same organizations to fundraise for a track as we are for Hoke Field. It's a different group of individuals. So there may be resources out there that we haven't tapped yet that may have some interest in helping raise some money, generate some funds for the track.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I agree with you, Pat and Andrea.
Okay. So Becky, how do we want to wrap this conversation up for today?
I think for today, we are now aware. I think we look into, I think we set monies aside, as Andrea suggested, not going into the general fund for the field logos. For that money that comes in, let's put that in a separate account to look after the turf field, and then let's investigate further the different organizations that might be available to do some fundraising or grant writing for the track field, for the track surface. And if we are unsuccessful with any of those, then we talk about what to do next. Do we borrow? Do we fold? How do we do that?
Okay.
So I would like to put the the monies being generated in our existing turf field account. I'm just going to use the same account that we've used for the budgeting of the turf field, so that it all stays there.
Yes, just not in the general fund.
Correct.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
Thank you.
Thank you. All
Okay.
right.
Awesome. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Chad, did you have something else? Your hand is raised. Or was that just left over from before?
That was just left over from before. I'm sorry.
Awesome. Nope, that's okay. Just wanted to make sure you had a chance to share your thoughts. All right, then the second item is discussion for Potential for additional state revenues. So I'm certain that you've all heard the news that the governor has put forth a biennial budget that would raise the state share towards education up to 55%. Yesterday, all school districts received a breakdown of what that would mean for school districts. And in MSAD11, that increase would be $608,000. Now, I heard today that most likely this will pass, and it will pass down party lines. So if it passes by the majority, then it goes into effect 90 days after it is approved at the legislature. If it is approved by a 2/3 vote, then it is considered, it can be classified as emergency legislation and we can access it immediately. Now, what does this mean for us? This money will be available if it's approved by the legislature. It will be approved this year. Okay, so it will be available for this year. However, we have already posted our warrants. We have already developed our budget, and that budget has already been posted to the community. So we have a few options, and this is what we need to discuss today as to what these options are and get some guidance as to what you would like to do. One option is to do nothing, just accept that money, and it would be part of an undesignated balance that we would be able to access in the future. Another option is to hold a special meeting in November during the election to go out to the community and ask that you access that money to be able to use it for something, whatever that is. But you would have to have a special vote on it by the community. The other option that comes to mind that you could do is you could just take that money and just send it back to taxpayers. So we wouldn't need to do anything different above and beyond what we're already doing. You would just be able to send that back to taxpayers if that's what you wish to do. Now, with the budget that we're putting forth, there was an increase to taxpayers of $633,000. This is $608,000, so it would make it would be neutral for the most part, the impact to taxpayers. Andrea ran some numbers. So if you were to say, we'll just give it back to the taxpayers, then Gardner would see a decrease of just shy of $5,400. Pittston would see an increase of just shy of $32,500. Randolph would see an increase of about $5,600. And West Gardner would see a decrease of a little bit over $7,500. So I'm putting this out to you today so that you can discuss and decide how you would like to proceed. What do you want to do with this money, especially in light of the fact that we do have a meeting on Monday with the elected officials, and they're probably going to be very interested in knowing how you wish to, or what your plans are for this additional money that we're going to receive in the district most likely.
Pat,
So I'll just kind of open that up. Yes.
can I just provide a little bit of background for people who may be watching about
Sure.
things that you may have said? So when Pat said that we could do nothing and it would go into our general fund and we could keep it as unallocated fund balance, if you remember from our previous meetings, we are not allowed to expend more than our current budget. So we couldn't expend those funds in the current year unless you went to the voters in a special meeting and requested permission to spend additional funds. So the voters would take, there would be a vote. And I'm not sure if it would have to go out to referendum or just a special budget meeting, but that is why we could not spend those additional funds without permission from the taxpayers. So I just wanted to let everyone know that while it's in our unallocated fund balance, we are not permitted by law to expend without authorization.
Questions from board members or comments? Jim?
I'd like to know, is the approach to this 55% going to be an ongoing approach? Or is this a one-time event, or do we know? Probably we don't, but I'm curious to know about it. And I think just my personal feel is that the vast majority of the selectmen, women, or counselors would like to see that money go back to the taxpayers. So it makes life a little simpler for all of them. And it should for us too, if we make every effort to keep their taxes down as much as possible. Thank you.
So Jim, to answer your question, it's impossible to predict what the future will hold. We're in this situation because the revenue forecasting was significantly greater than anticipated. So back in January, maybe, they were expecting $400 million, and instead the revenue was $900 million. So, but who knows what the future will hold, depending upon the economy. So.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Patrick, and then Cullen.
Is there any way to have a capital improvement account and be able to take this money and put it into a capital improvement account? I mean, we all know that our schools are aging, and there's a lot of repairs that we're talking about that has to be done. I mean, maybe not today, but at some point we're going to be sitting here talking about replacing buildings and stuff like that. And I just didn't know if there's a way we can take that's a good chunk of change that we can put in there. But I do like Jim's thought process also about, the tax burden relief. So that's the two avenues I'd like to investigate further.
So by statute, we are, there are only certain kinds of reserve accounts that we are allowed to maintain. And one of them is a capital improvement fund. Now, before we can put monies in, the voters need to approve the monies that are swept in from our budget into the capital improvement fund, as well as when the time comes when we want to spend those funds, the voters need to vote on how the monies are used. So yes, we do have a reserve account. There's only $50,000 in it. We started it 2 years ago. That's one of the two funds that we do have. The other one, if you remember, was a special education reserve fund that we started last year. And there's 300,000 in that.
So theoretically, it is possible to have a capital improvement fund specifically for buildings. And what we'd have to do is have the voters or the town leaders state that, yes, let's just do that instead. Is that the route that we have to take for that?
It would not be the town leaders. It would be a special budget meeting. It would be actual voters.
Okay.
Patrick, just so you're clear, because we're an SAD, our budget, our money is our money, and the city doesn't have control of it like it does in the Augusta School Department. A municipal school department has control over the school budget. Our money is separate and it's ours. So.
Okay, that makes sense. I just wanted to see the process for that, because that's one of the things that I've seen over the years working for a municipality. There's no capital improvement planning for the future, and I know, my hometown up north, they just spent over $8 million on a new school. So I know the cost of this stuff is something we need to start planning for. And instead of, obviously I'd like to have the money go back and relieve some of the tax burden. But if we take this money and put it towards something in the future that, we're not coming to these communities with, $10, $12 million plan for a new school or something like that, then this would start offsetting that. So, but thank you.
Cullen?
I'm really enjoying this conversation because it's a little bit of pay me now or pay me later. I was thinking right in the middle between Jim and Pat. Andrea, could you remind me if the district's holding outstanding long-term debt?
Yes, we have a revolving renovation, not a revolving renovation loan. We have loans where we just did a huge capital improvement project for 15 years. Other than that, that's pretty much the extent of our long-term debt. We just upgraded all of our boilers and burners and many other efficiency projects, and we probably have another 15 years for payback.
So it's kind of interesting to think if you think of this money as a windfall instead of a new floor, where do we get the most use out of it? By paying down long-term debt, by doing immediate tax relief, or by putting it into that capital improvement fund so that it saves us down the road.
That long-term debt, the interest rate on that is about 2%. So, I mean, when we borrow, yeah.
Okay, so if lumber is going up like 20% a year, then no point in paying down the long-term debt. Gotcha.
The optics of tax relief are really good. But we also have things that we need to look out for as well. And that doesn't mean that I'm not in favor of tax relief, because I am. It's a hard question. Yes, Jim?
Did you call on me, Becky?
I did, yep.
Okay. Maybe we could meet somewhere in the middle. I hadn't thought about what Patrick talked about, and that might be an idea. We could do part of it is pay down to the taxpayers, and part of it put in a fund for a physical plant refurbishment and stuff like that. This may not come about again, and if it doesn't come, then this will have been a windfall, and it's kind of foolish to budget all of it towards a windfall if we're going to have to claw it back next year and then some if we have a tough year where we have to spend extra money. So I like Patrick's idea. I hadn't thought about that, frankly. So.
Can someone throw out a number?
What if we went straight down the middle? 304,000.
Yeah,
like that
I mean, you
number.
could. I was thinking 250, like do $250,000 and the rest to tax relief, which would give you 358.
That's
Okay.
Yep.
So we will probably need to wait until next spring to be able to sweep that money into the special reserve account, unless we want to hold another budget in the fall, another budget referendum in the fall.
Yeah, if you take $250,000 and put it into a capital reserve account, you put the rest on property relief, then rough estimates, it brings the cost to taxpayers, or the share to taxpayers, the increase down from 630,000 to about 275,000. So I don't know how you all feel about that number.
Do you need a motion on this?
I don't, Jim, I didn't come into the meeting thinking that we would need a motion, but it might not hurt to kind of capture your thinking in the minutes. And that way we can pass it along to the entire board, and it will just be for reference down the road if anyone wants to question why we didn't put the entire 608,000 towards taxpayers.
We could also bring this to the town fathers, so to speak, and town mothers to let them know what we're thinking, at least at the next meeting we've got coming up here. What, in a week is it? I'm not sure on my scheduling, but we
It's
could at least
Monday.
tell them what we're thinking.
Yeah, it's Monday night, and that is exactly my thought.
Right. And that's why we brought it up tonight, so that we could have a conversation, so that we could be part of the conversation that we have on Monday.
I'd be happy to make a motion if that's okay.
Mhm.
Before we do that,
Okay.
Colin has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to throw one thing out there, and I honestly have no clue exactly how this is going to unwind. So if anybody's thought about it and has some thoughts, I would love to hear them. We also have the CARES Act coming into play, which is going to do some weird things economically. Folks who have small kids are going to see a substantial benefit over the coming year. Folks who are on fixed income are not going to see that same benefit, and yet we're going to spread out the school budget and the potential to reduce the tax burden across everybody more or less equally. Pat, Becky, Andrea, have you had any thoughts about how this is really going to impact the community, and how that relates back to the budget process?
No, the only thought that I really had is, we have historically tried to keep the impact to taxpayers as minimal as possible, understandably. And this particular year has been extremely challenging for many of our families. Many of our families who may benefit from the CARES Act, they had to upfront daycare costs. Many of them, some of them gave up jobs because of daycare issues. And so from my perspective, being able to minimize the impact of our budget to as many families and community members as possible, I think is an important step for us to take.
Okay, thank you. I think I would support splitting the difference, as you say. I mean, it'd be foolish to not put a little bit of this aside for future project work. But if we have a budget we're comfortable with now, seems like some of that could go back.
I would agree with, yeah, I would agree with Pat, and I agree with you that we should, I mean, yes, you're right. There is going to be an impact for families with small children, but not for other families that are perhaps on fixed incomes, and that will be difficult.
There's no good answer.
No,
Colin.
I'm sorry, I just something I've been thinking about a lot, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Maybe we should go to Jim's motion.
There's not a good answer. I do think the city of Gardner, at least, would like for us very much. I mean, in the conversations that I've had, I think they would very much like for us to give it all back. However, our budget is bigger, and we have many more employees, and we have requirements of things that we have to do. We have the ED 279 and just formulas that we must follow, and things that we have to do. And one of the things that we have to do is maintain our facilities and take care of all the things that we have.
But Cullen is right with the passing along of the revenue sharing, or increasing the amount returning to the municipalities and revenue sharing and back to school districts. The intent is to reduce the impact to taxpayers. That is what the intent of this is. So whatever we are able to do, I think would be greatly appreciated.
Alyssa had a hand up, and then Pat Saucier.
Thanks, Becky. I'm in agreement. I know I joined late, so I appreciate you doing the math quickly when you guys were talking about that. I think the idea of splitting it makes sense. Patrick, like you mentioned, I'll make it even a worse number. Where I grew up in Massachusetts, the new high school is $300 million. So not out of the water on how much these things cost. I think as fiscal agents, we're trying to be equitable. I appreciate, Andrea, your comment about giving it back. I think you were good at teaching me a few years ago, if all these things happen, well, all these things happen this year. So I think we're trying to be as good as we can with, you know, the valuation, the reduction in students, and we also got federal money. So I'm agreeing with what the group has come to. So I just wanted to offer that. Thank you.
And just a reminder to Patrick and Alyssa, we would never pay for a school budget project on our own. We would never. So traditionally when school budgets are constructed, you go on the state construction list, you make the list, and the state pays for a significant portion of your school project. The problem is the state only funds so many school projects every so many years. I am hoping with this increase of funds that they're looking at increase to the number of projects that they are currently or plan to fund, but it would never be a locally funded project. I should say never, but we've never had one. There are communities who do vote that way, but not our community. We've always had a state-funded construction project for a new school.
Thanks, Andrea. Appreciate that.
Well, if I heard correctly, I think Alyssa said that she made a motion for a $300 million high school for Gardner. Is that?
I'm on
I'm
mute.
just joking
I
with
did
that.
not.
No, and you know, like I've said, I mean, I've been on the school board for a little over a year, and I'm learning as I go the different processes. I know the municipal side of things with my profession and stuff like that. I trying to switch gears to the school board side of things, and it's a completely different beast. But I'm looking at it as, you know, as a taxpayer, yes, I'd love to see a relief in the tax bill. I mean, that's obvious. Anybody would like to see that go down. And I think we should be in a position to do the best we can for our taxpayers, because I mean, that is who's funding our, you know, what's necessary to make ends meet. But if we can look long-term to have some sort of thing, and that's why I made that motion, or I didn't make the motion, but threw that idea out there, is if we can go to the state and say, you know, we have X amount of dollars, this is what we're looking at building for a school or whatever project it is. From my experience with grants, and it's very limited, is, you know, if you have some capital that's available, they're more apt to give you the rest of the financing, because it shows that you've done the work, you've planned for it, and it's less that they have to spend so they can fund other projects. So like I said, I'm just throwing out ideas, and I'm going to shut up now.
Becky, are you ready for a motion?
Yes, I left my area because the squealing was too much. I think so. I want to be really clear that however, I don't want anybody to go away with the idea that I have bad feelings about the city of Gardner with regard to our budget. I don't. I just know that they, like us, are just really concerned about what things cost and the impact. So I just want to be clear that there's no ill will on my part.
And I would just remind the board, I don't know that I have it in front of me. I was trying to gather some data for the presentation for Monday night. And I went back to the presentation that we did last year. I think it was in the budget book last year. And as a school district last year, we spent $2,030 below the state average per pupil. And compared to Augusta, RSU2, RSU4, and RSU38, all of the school districts around us, they all spend more than us. Some of them
Right.
a couple $1,000s per student, considerably more. When I went back to the year prior to that, we were under the state average by $2,768 per person. And at that time, Augusta was slightly lower than ours, but again, RSU2, RSU4, RSU38 are all spending significantly more than we are. per pupil. The state is no longer providing this data. So I'm not able to find out or to be able to share with the elected officials what our average is per pupil compared to the state average any longer. It's just no longer available. But I think it's important information. So I hear the concerns about our budget. Yes, we are the biggest employer and we probably have the biggest budget. I understand that. I do recognize that. But when you really look at how we are spending, where we're spending money, how much we're asking compared to similarly sized school districts, we are generally in the lower 15% around the state. So I just kind of throw that out as a reminder that we're not just going wild and budgeting for things that are not absolutely essential for students to provide a solid education.
And Cullen, you're right. Much of our budget is fixed. It's salaries, it's benefits, it's health insurance.
Oh, I meant specifically as opposed to like a company that makes widgets that ships them out someplace else. When we pay employees, that money typically stays in the community and gets cycled back through multiple times. And if we are in the position where the state, I think you said is up to 55%.
Yes.
You know, every dollar over 50 ends up being a benefit to the whole community through that added on leverage.
So we have a do we have a motion? We have a motion, yes?
Jib tried, yes.
I tried. You cut me off. I can't believe it, but you did.
I out-talked you. I can't even imagine that, Jim.
I will make the motion that we set aside $250,000 for, and what did you call it, Andrew? What kind of, where are we going to put it?
Well, we're going to ask our governing body, the taxpayers, to allow us to sweep that into a reserve account in the spring.
Okay.
Next spring.
250,000 goes into a reserve account for future repairs or what is necessary, and the balance is to be returned to the taxpayers in the most expedient way possible.
I'll second that.
There we go. Second by Cullen. Thank you. Pat, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Becky Fless,
Yay.
Nicole Medore,
Yay.
Alyssa Tracy,
Yay.
James Lothridge,
Yay.
Patrick Saucier,
Yay.
Cullen McGuff.
Yay.
That is unanimous.
Great.
All right, that's all we have, Becky.
Any future agenda items?
Not at the moment.
Can I
Colin
make a
has
his
request,
hand
actually? Having joined the, oops, am I on mute? No, okay. Having joined the group mid-pandemic, I wondered if it's possible to either get permission to do a tour of the schools after the school year is over. It doesn't need to be fancy, just let me walk around the buildings. Or if there's a current like inventory review, just because like it's one thing to sit here and look at the reports and be in a good discussion. I'd love to just see the condition of the plant. It would really help me understand better the needs, I think.
So at one time, Becky, I don't recall how long ago, we had there was a Saturday morning where we jumped on a bus, all the interested board members, and we toured the district. We have enough new board members, Becky, that is something that we may want to consider. And yeah, maybe we can do that this summer.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Just please consider it a rainy day request. I know the burden's been awfully high this year, so adding another event on is not great, but thank you.
Or even a gray day, just not the sunniest beach day of the summer. No, but absolutely. Yeah, it's been quite a few years since we did that. Actually, I think, Jim, you were on the board when we did that, weren't you?
No, I've never been on Other than to Pittston, where I picked up my granddaughter, I've never set foot on a school
Well,
as
then
a
let's
board
do,
member.
that'll make you,
Wow.
And you know my thinking on that issue. So,
just said, that'll make you happy.
well, it'll get me halfway there, but not quite. But we're
There you
close.
We'll take whatever we can get.
Yep, I will.
Okey doke. So yes, we'll make a plan to do that on some gray day this summer.
Just a reminder to Pat and Becky regarding the budget, we will need to set a special meeting to accept the results of the election after the 8th, so that I can also process the assessments to the town. So.
Yep.
Okay.
All right then. Thank you all very much. It's still light out. Go enjoy the rest of your evenings.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.